Rach.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rachel Lucas Baron, and on behalf of the Shelter Island Public Library and the West Hampton Free Library, welcome to our program on censorship. As this is a webinar, you will not be able to see or hear your fellow attendees, just us and the PowerPoint. So if you have any questions, please write it down in the Q&A area and we'll try and get to it at the end. If you have any technical difficulties, I'll be standing by to help you out. So just type up your issue in the comments section and I will do my best to help you so you can enjoy the program. Okay, with that, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Hello, everyone. My name is Terry Lucas. I'm the director of the Shelter Island Public Library. Prior to becoming a librarian, I was an attorney for 10 years and then a bookstore owner for 13 years. So with each career, my interest in censorship and book banning has grown. When Nola from West Hampton asked if I wanted to do this program, collaborating with Mara Zonderman, I immediately said yes. Before you meet Mara, I want you to know that last month she presented a program at her library with more information about this subject. The link to that presentation will be in the chat and will be shown again at the end of the program. I highly recommend watching it. It goes into a lot more detail about some of the legal cases and a lot of the history. So it's very interesting. Mara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Terry. So my name is Mara Zonderman. I am the head of reference and adult services at the West Hampton Free Library. And like Terry, before I became a librarian, I was also a lawyer. In my case, I was actually a lobbyist for two different nonprofits in Washington, D.C. that focused on civil rights and civil liberties. So my interest in First Amendment issues goes back a long way. In library school, I focused on it in some of my research. And now also as the mother of two school-age boys, as a lot of this focuses on what happens in the school, my interest continues. So that's me. And Terry, do you want to kick off the presentation?
Sure. I'm gonna share the screen now. I don't know if that means Mara and I are going to disappear or not. So you might not see our faces, but you'll see our screen and we'll go from there. Okay. 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 So I want to start by sharing a definition of censorship. Censorship is a system in which an authority limits the ideas that people are allowed to express and prevents books, movies, works of art, documents, or any other kinds of communications from being seen or made available to the public because they include or support certain ideas. Next, I want to explain the difference between a banned book and a challenged book. And you might need to move your little heads out of the way so you can see this. According to the American Library Association, a challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objections of a person or group. A banning is the removal of those materials. Challenges don't simply involve a person expressing a point of view. Rather, they are actually an attempt to remove materials from the curricula or library, thereby restricting the access of others. In an article published last April by Reuters, it was reported that over a 9-month period, 86 school districts had removed 1,145 titles from their shelves. Some were removed permanently, some removed pending investigation. Okay. Having my screen doesn't want to do that. Okay. The reasons for challenges and book bans are numerous and include racial issues, encouragement of damaging lifestyles, blasphemous language, sexual situations or dialogues, violence, negativity, witchcraft, political bias, offensive language. The motivation for challenges is usually to protect others from different ideas or from information. And the reasons sometimes reach the absurd. In Alabama, at some point in the last years, the state textbook committee wanted to ban the Diary of Anne Frank because, quote unquote, it was a real downer. Mara, can you talk a little bit about libraries and their roles with respect to book challenges and banning?
Absolutely. So if you want to advance the slide, there we go. So the American Library Association, or the ALA, has what's called the Library Bill of Rights. It was first put out in 1939 and has been amended 6 times since then, most recently in 2020. If you want to give me my first couple of bullet points. So the ALA defines the Bill of Rights as, quote, an unambiguous statement of basic principles that should govern the service of all libraries. And I just pulled out 2 of, I think, are the most relevant and important points within the Bill of Rights. There are 7 or 8, I think. So books and other library resources should be provided for the interest, information, and enlightenment of all people of the community the library serves. Materials should not be excluded from the collection because of the origin, background, or views of those contributing to their creation. So it doesn't matter who wrote the book, the book should be evaluated on its own merit, whatever the collection policy of the library is. And going on, libraries should provide materials and information presenting all points of view on current and historical issues. Materials should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. And that's a very interesting point. And Terry, I'm sure you feel this as well. When I look to buy material, books for the library, it's very challenging sometimes to buy those books, especially the political memoirs that come out all the time now, from the other side, quote unquote. But as a librarian, I understand that it is my responsibility to have a balanced collection. And that's something that does not get discussed a lot when we talk about censorship, is this issue of self-censorship. And it could be not buying books you don't agree with, or it could be not buying books that you are afraid will be challenged. We're going to talk about that a little more as we go on. So Terry, if you want to move on, that's just, if you want more, that's the site. There's a slide at the end that has a lot of these links as well. So the ALA also has something else called the Freedom to Read Statement. And this Freedom to Read statement is often adopted into the policies of individual libraries. I know at West Hampton, this Freedom to Read statement is a part of our policies. Terry, I suspect it is in Shelter Island as well? Yes. It is, great. So just some of the highlights that are relevant. And this one is particularly important. We see this come up all the time. Only parents and guardians have the right and the responsibility to determine their children's and only their children's access to library resources. Parents and guardians who do not want their children to have access to specific library services, materials, or facilities should so advise their children. It won't come as a surprise to anybody that what we're talking about is people who don't just say, I don't want my child to read this book. They say, I don't want anybody to be able to read this book. And as a parent, I find that this sentence is, this clause here is particularly meaningful because I gotta tell you, my kids are 9 and 11, almost 12, and there are lots of books I don't want them reading yet, or maybe ever, but that's between me and them. I'm not gonna rely on the librarian, the school librarian, the teacher to say that they can't read, and I certainly wouldn't expect to have the book kept out from everybody else's hands. It's my responsibility. I wouldn't, and I would be very angry if anybody tried to keep a book out of my kids' hands that I thought they should be able to read. But it's an important part because most attempts at censorship and book banning do happen with eyes on children, whether it's the school library or the public library. So also moving on, librarians and library governing bodies have a public and professional obligation to ensure that all members of the community they serve have free, equal, and equitable access to the entire range of library resources, regardless of content, approach, or format. This principle of library service applies equally to all users, minors as well as adults. So if you look at that on the face, it's kind of like, what? Kids should have equal access even to adult material? This is where the parents come in, right? Now, in West Hampton, most kids' library cards don't actually allow them to check out adult materials. It's up to the parent to say, no, it's okay with me. So on the face of it, this clause isn't actually how it works, but I find it very interesting as a statement of principle that everyone should have free and equal access. You might want to add 2 age-appropriate items, but according to the ALA, that's not how they chose to phrase it. And then the last bullet point there, the freedom to read is of little consequence when the reader cannot obtain matter fit for that reader's purpose. Whatever the purpose is, whether you just want a light book to read, whether you're looking to learn something, or whether you're the gay kid who only finds someone like you in a book, whatever your purpose is. And I want to read the very last paragraph of the freedom to read statement also, because I find it to be very, very powerful. We state these propositions neither lightly nor as easy generalizations. We here stake out a lofty claim for the value of the written word. We do so because we believe that it is possessed of enormous variety and usefulness, worthy of cherishing and keeping free. We realize that the application of these propositions may mean the dissemination of ideas and manners of expression that are repugnant to many persons. We do not state these propositions in the comfortable belief that what people read is unimportant. We believe rather that what people read is deeply important, that ideas can be dangerous, but that the suppression of ideas is fatal to a democratic society. Freedom itself is a dangerous way of life, but it is ours. So powerful words there by the ALA.
Oh, goosebumps.
I know, right? So wind just blowing? No, that was just no freedom. What do we want? Freedom. Okay, next slide. I just want to tell you just a brief history of libraries and how librarians came to be forefront in the fight against censorship, because it's a sort of interesting history. So back in 1879, the ALA adopted its motto: the best reading for the largest number for the least cost. That's like perfect, right? That's obviously what we want. But question the use of the word best reading, okay? Best according to whom, right? As it turns out, it was best at the time according to a group of largely male, Christian, middle-class professional librarians who, although well-intentioned, thinking that good books would lead to good social behavior, were somewhat blind to the actual needs of their users. At the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, which the ALA is also based in Chicago, so they had the model library there at the World's Fair. And they had this very complicated algorithm of, percentage of history and percentage of this. Their library only included 15% fiction, even though at the time, circulation statistics showed that 75% of material circulating in public libraries was fiction. So you're going to see there's this big disconnect between what people are actually looking to libraries to do and what professional librarians at the time think they should be doing. And we'll see later that eventually they sort of come together. But moving on. So it wasn't until after World War II that libraries started to focus more on popular books rather than this elitist interpretation of the best books. And that was because during World War I, there was a great push to send reading material to the sailors and the soldiers. Reading material that was what they actually wanted to read. And then when they came home, so many of the books were already in circulation, and those troops wanted more of that. And that was just hard to push again. So the ALA, they sort of settled on this idea that, light reading may not be the best, but it was at least harmless, they said, and unlikely to lead to the social ills that bad books could bring on. But readers' advisors, who are, when you go to the library and say, I'm looking for a book to read, what we're doing there is reader's advisory. And at the time, reader's advisory was still focused on getting the best, as we defined it before, the best books into the hands of readers. So in the 1930s, next bullet point, as images of book burnings from Nazi Germany circulated, librarians began to think about their role as defenders of intellectual freedom for obvious reasons, right? And it was during this time in 1939 that we saw the Bill of Rights that we just learned about. And also in the 1930s, remember, it was the Great Depression. So there was a lot more demand for library services, whether because people couldn't afford to buy their own books, obviously there was that, because people needed a warm place to go on a cold winter's day. Also during the Great Depression, we saw libraries able to do a lot of expansion because they got a lot of resources through the Works Progress Administration. 350 new libraries were built across the country, and people were employed to rebind books, create indices and bibliographies, and fund rural library demonstration projects where they would go out to a rural area and show the people what a library was and why they should have one too. And then it was during World War II, there was even more of this idea of getting books into the hands of the troops. If anybody's read a pocketbook, they're still in circulation. The pocketbooks, that press started to get pocket-sized books overseas to the troops that could be fit in a pocket or a backpack, and they were all kinds of popular titles. And again, when they came home, they wanted the same kind of popular reading material that they were able to get during the war. After World War II, although librarians in the public libraries were more willing to carry materials that their communities actually wanted, the profession, not necessarily the librarians on the ground, but the people telling those librarians what they should be doing, continued to be told to carry only the best books. But they weren't taking into account, for example, the needs of children. No studies at the time looked at the needs of children. And that was, children were becoming one of the most, the biggest population of library users. Story Hour, just at the beginning, got kids into the library, and librarians started to realize they needed books that kids wanted to read. But just as librarians were starting to make progress in giving their communities what they actually wanted, McCarthyism came knocking on the library door. Whether or not the librarians agreed with McCarthy or were afraid of the consequences of having controversial titles on their shelves, many librarians at the time started to exhibit these themes of self-censorship that I was talking about a few minutes ago, because they didn't want to be the ones to fall under that spotlight. We all have heard of, how terrifying that could be. But moving on to the next bullet point, McCarthyism did bring out the best in some librarians, and the ALA published their Freedom to Read statement in 1953. President Eisenhower himself told the 1953 Dartmouth graduating class not to be afraid to go into your library and read every book. And he had a letter read at the ALA conference too. He urged librarians to resist the book burners. So there was a push against McCarthyism, but it was problematic to buy books that might get you, come in under the Red Scare. Eisenhower apparently was a big friend to libraries. He signed the Library Services Act in 1956, which greatly enlarged funding to libraries, including public and school libraries. So at this time, federal funding is coming in. Librarians are starting to wake up to what their patrons really want. In the Johnson administration, it even increased, but this combination of increased demand and increased funding started to revolutionize the way librarians thought of their job. Technology and demographics also impacted how librarians thought of their job through the 60s into the 90s and on. And the focus of the best books became part of the history of librarianship as librarians became more focused on serving the entertainment and informational needs of their communities. The emphasis on bringing library services to the largest number at the least cost hasn't diminished though, as the gains in funding from the 50s and 60s have largely gone by the wayside. But that era taught librarians the importance of respecting the privacy of our patrons and resisting outside efforts to control the material we have on our shelves. And lest you think this is a little bit off topic, but lest you think that McCarthyism was the last time that the privacy of patrons was an issue, think about the Patriot Act. There were special provisions in the Patriot Act about getting library records of somebody, that was suspected of having a bomb or, learning how to build a bomb. So it comes up, and I'm sure it will come up again. But librarians, through this process of becoming attuned to the needs of their patrons, have moved themselves into the forefront of understanding that there's a book for every person and a person for every book, right?
Yes.
And not to bend to the one community member who comes in and says, this shouldn't be on the shelf. So that's a little bit of the history. It's really a fascinating history. I probably could have gone on for a whole hour just about that, but I won't. But aside from the library world, there is a history of book banning in the US. Terry, you want to tell us about that?
Sure. And I always love, there's a book for every person and a person for every book. That's like, they kind of drum that into you in library school. So books have been banned as long as there have been books, probably. In 210 BC, there was a Chinese emperor who buried the scholars alive to control the writing of history. And the idea was, he also burned all the existing books. And the idea was, if all the books were gone and all the scholars were gone, then history would start with him. So that was a little dicey, to say the least. So in the pre-revolutionary America, book banning is thought to have started here in 1637, and Thomas Morton made fun of the Puritans, and they did not like it in this book called The New English Canaan. This book mocked and criticized the Puritans, and so they not only banned the book in Massachusetts, they banned Thomas Morton in Massachusetts, and he was taken out of the state bodily and could never come back again. In 1852, Harriet Beecher Stowe published Uncle Tom's Cabin. This book was banned by the Confederate government for its pro-abolitionist view. And there are numerous other examples, including the banning of Huckleberry Finn by the Concord, Massachusetts Library for being rough, coarse, and inelegant, dealing with a series of experiences not elevating. And that harkens back to it not being a good book that was good for building character. So this is a man that every librarian loves to hate. This is Anthony Comstock. Anthony Comstock was an anti-vice crusader from the late 1800s, and in 1873 he formed the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. The society crusaded against pornography and persuaded Congress to pass federal legislation known as the Comstock Act. It made illegal the transportation and delivery of obscene, lewd, or lascivious materials. So Comstock was the head honcho in the Postal Service, and he set out to ensure that this law was enforced. And he called the mail for improper materials. He and his colleagues later claimed they had destroyed 160 tons of obscenity. But obscenity was very, very broadly interpreted, and obscene materials included medical textbooks, anything by Oscar Wilde, anything discussing contraception or abortion, and even the Canterbury Tales. And this law, the Comstock Law, hung around for a very long time. And a number of court cases resulted because of that. So in 1933, the US Southern District Court in New York heard the case of the United States v. one book called Ulysses. This is a fascinating case in which this New York Society for the Suppression of Vice brought a suit against serialized versions of the book, and a New York court found them to be obscene. After the book was actually published in 1922, it was frequently smuggled in from Europe. Through a number of pretty interesting machinations, Random House got involved in getting the case to Judge John Woolsey, who was known to love books, and he also was known to write poetic, florid decisions. The judge found the book was not obscene, saying, "I am quite aware that owing to some of its scenes, Ulysses is a rather strong draught to ask some sensitive, though normal, persons to take. But in my considered opinion, after long reflection, is that whilst in many places the effect of Ulysses in the reader undoubtedly is somewhat emetic, nowhere does it tend to be an aphrodisiac. Ulysses may therefore be admitted into the United States." So basically, it made him throw up, so it could come on in. So, but I really love that decision. And Random House was very clever. They went through a lot of different, or their attorney was very clever, went through a lot of different hoops to make sure that they got the judge that they wanted, that they placed the suit in a certain light so that it would get heard. In 1959, the publisher of Grove Press sued the post office in the Southern District of New York again for confiscating copies of Lady Chatterley's Lover, which had long been banned. In making his ruling, Judge Frederick Van Pelt Ryan relied on a Supreme Court case, Roth v. United States, in which Justice Brennan noted that the First Amendment's purpose was to ensure unfettered interchange of ideas, and that all ideas having even the slightest redeeming social importance, unorthodox ideas, controversial ideas, even ideas hateful to the prevailing climate of opinion, have the full protection of the guarantees. A little bit closer to home in 1975, once again in New York, though, the Island Trees School Board received a complaint from a group called Parents of New York United, saying that policies of the school with respect to library books were too permissive. Specifically, they complained about 9 books, including books by Kirk Vonnegut and Langston Hughes. They said the books were anti-American, anti-Christian, anti-Semitic, and just plain filthy. The school district removed the books. 5 students challenged the decision in court, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held that the right to read is implied by the First Amendment, and that the government, including public schools, cannot restrict speech because it does not agree with the content of that speech. The court said it can hardly be argued that either teachers or students shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. So book banning and challenges to books are not new in the United States. Mara's going to talk about some current book challenges in schools and library.
Yeah, so there are a lot of them. It's been in the news a lot. I'm only going to highlight a few recent cases because we really could go on all day. Terry, you want to advance the slide?
Yeah.
Okay, so go back one. I'm not quite ready. That was my filler slide.
Okay.
So I want to just give a little bit of background. So according to the so usually challenges come under the guise of a desire to protect children from inappropriate sexual content or offensive language. According to the ALA's Office of Intellectual Freedom, the top 3 reasons for challenging books in the past few years have been that the material was considered to be sexually explicit, the material contained offensive language, or the material was unsuited to any age group, which I find really odd language, but that's what they said. So although these are commendable motivations to keep age inappropriate books out of the hands of children, we are reminded that the Library Bill of Rights states again that parents and only parents and guardians have the right and the responsibility to be that guardian for their own child reading. Now let's see what the first set of examples is. So this the next slide. This comes from a case in Annandale, New Jersey. There was so the New York Times likes to set a great story. So it starts out with the librarian is sitting down to watch the public school board meeting. Usually she watches Jeopardy apparently, but she was going to watch the meeting because she knew that there was going to be some discussion of book banning and challenging. So she tuned in, and the next thing she knows, she hears her own name. A parent stood up and denounced 2 of these books, Lawn Boy and Gender Queer, calling them pornographic. Both books, by the way, are award winners, but they have LGBTQ characters and include frank depictions of sex. They have both been challenged across the country, but they were available at the North Hunterdon High School Library. Then the parent called out Ms. Hickson, the librarian, by name for allowing this woman's 16-year-old son to check out the books. The parent said, "This amounts to an effort to groom our kids to make them more willing to participate in the heinous acts described in these books. It grooms them to accept the inappropriate advances of an adult." So although the sexual content of the books may have been the cover, it's clear what was actually going on here. We've all heard about it in the news. Anybody who's been paying attention has been hearing this whole thing about grooming, and often, if people aren't willing to come out and outright accuse someone of grooming, for example, All Boys Aren't Blue, they just don't want someone exposed to this kind of story. That's a memoir. And they don't want their children exposed to this kind of story. Next slide then. So this I find to be particularly interesting, and this is also something that has happened across the country, but I'll tell you about this one in particular. So the School Board of Central York School District in Pennsylvania overturned temporarily the ban on books, including the ones you see, told from the perspective of gay, Black, or Latino children. This is, for now, actually a success story of what you can do when you fight against censorship. But let me give you the background. So what happened was, the previous year, in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and Black Lives Matter and everything that was going on in the country, the district's diversity committee put together a list of books to serve as a resource guide, not just books, materials, videos, websites, all kinds of different resources. A resource guide for students and teachers as they grappled with, the racial and social turmoil that was going on. Somebody got a hold of this list. It wasn't private. And every title on the list was banned. Teachers and students protested the removal of the books from the library and instructions to the teachers that the books and all the other materials were not to be used in the classroom. Why were these resources banned? What reasons were given? Because some of them criticized the police or focused too heavily on ideas like white privilege. One parent went so far as to say, "I don't want my daughter growing up feeling guilty because she's white." And a school board member felt that the resources contributed to a curriculum that creates division and hate. And I read that, and I just will be completely honest, I read that and said, what? So instead of letting people read the books that were supposed to be there to reduce division and hate, you're removing them because you say they create division. What? Anyway, that's just me. At the board meeting reversing the ban, and remember, it's temporary. They sort of said, "Oh, no, we didn't mean to actually ban these books. We just meant we needed time to consider them." Like, okay, whatever. So what these parents, one of the school board members said, "What these parents oppose is the use of diversity training as a tool of activism or political indoctrination." So it's very similar to that grooming thing we just heard. They think that by allowing students, remember we're talking about high school students mostly, well, not with the ones that I actually put the pictures of, but they're saying that by allowing students to read these books, they're somehow going to be indoctrinated into certain ideas, including, it was a big one in the article that I read, which is cited there at the bottom, about this idea of they didn't want their kids to feel bad for being white just by reading about Black people or people of other cultures. A teacher and faculty advisor of the students protesting the ban came right out and said what I was hoping somebody would say, was that kind of rhetoric undermined the autonomy of teachers to train students to think critically about what they were reading. Critical thinking. Apparently that is dangerous. Next slide. So many of you may have heard about this one. This made big news in January of this year. The school board of McMinn County, Tennessee, voted to remove mouse from the curriculum because of its unnecessary use of profanity and nudity and its depiction of violence and suicide, which is true. All of that is in there. Author Art Spiegelman was very vocal in his response. He said, "This is disturbing imagery, but you know what? It's disturbing history." And he said he got the impression that the board members were asking, why can't they teach a nicer Holocaust? Sure. At one point during the board meeting where these books were removed from the curriculum, one of the members asked what other books the school would have to remove from the curriculum if it removed this one, just on the basis of foul language. And some of the answers that were provided later include Bridge to Terabithia, The Whipping Boy, To Kill a Mockingbird, but that falls under another topic for another day, so the chairman of the school board. And I just want to, a week or so after the school board meeting, I participated in a webinar with Art Spiegelman. I was just listening, he was talking. And it was led primarily by students from that area. It was really fascinating to hear their voices. And one of the students said to him, if they're trying to ban these books and remove all of this content from our libraries, how can we trust what they're teaching us? And he just looked so sad. He said, my dear, you can't. So it was great. And that almost brought me to tears, I have to say. But, it was great to see these students who were active and vocal and asking these questions, because they are the people who are going to come after you and me, Terry, in fighting this fight.
Fight the fight.
Yep. So next, on the next slide, so in May of 2022, so just a couple months ago, the head librarian of the Kingsland Library branch in, I don't know if that's Llano or Llano County, Texas, was fired for refusing to remove books from the library shelves as county officials had demanded. And I want to point out one thing about this story that's different. This is not a school board. And this is coming from government down, so from the county government itself. And I do have a bullet point on that. Oh yeah, that's on my next bullet point. I'll get to that, but I want to tell a story first. Sorry, I got confused about my bullet point. So Terry, I just wanted to follow up. I had a note about Huckleberry Finn too, about how it was banned and conquered due to its coarse vernacular language. But my favorite example is because he used the word sweat instead of perspire, right?
Yep.
Even recently, books like these have come under fire because remember, it's not just the right banning it. We do have efforts from more liberal communities, and they're looking at books like these in particular because of the use of the N-word. And even scholars generally agree that Twain was actually satirizing racial prejudice in the antebellum South, but people across the country argue that it should still be removed from libraries on the grounds that it is offensive and degrading. Another one, in Washington State, a school district voted to remove To Kill a Mockingbird, which was voted the best book of the past 125 years and has won, numerous awards. Remove it from the 9th grade curriculum at the request of staff members. Their objections included arguments that the novel marginalized characters of color, celebrated white saviorhood, and used racial slurs dozens of times without addressing their derogatory nature. So while the book is no longer a requirement, it remains on the district's list of approved novels, and teachers can still choose to assign it if they wish, which I want to discuss a different kind of, so there's taking something out of the library, but there are also books, there are instances where something is removed from the curriculum. Mm-hmm. And often when it's removed from the curriculum, like Mouse, for example, was removed from the curriculum. It may or may not still be in the library, I don't actually know. But it removes the ability of the teacher to use the tools that he or she think are the best tools to achieve the educational purpose. When something is removed from the library, the book is removed from the access of everyone. So there's two different things going on here. And both of these, of Mice and Men and To Kill a Mockingbird, are among the top 10 banned or challenged books in the past few years. Lastly, again, so I have the same caption, I'm sorry. I didn't proofread my slides. Anyway, this one actually comes from Mississippi, I believe, where these books were banned legislatively. So in the past, efforts to ban books usually followed a similar path. A parent or community member would complain about one or more books, and the school or library board would follow their policies in terms of considering the complaint. In fact, just to go back a little bit, in 1982, the Supreme Court said that a major consideration of whether the banning or removal of a book would be considered legitimate was whether the school or library district followed their own process in determining whether to ban or remove the books. So every library that I know, I'm sure Shelter Island does, I know West Hampton does, I know our school district does, has a challenge policy in place. Mm-hmm. And it usually involves somebody comes to us and says, I think this book should be removed. Okay, please fill out this form. We give them the form, they fill it out. One of the most important questions on the form is, have you actually read the entire book? Most people haven't, but that's beside the point. They fill out the form, and then it goes to a committee for consideration. And, policies differ, but that's sort of the basic outline. The committee then makes a recommendation and the board makes a decision. When that policy is not followed, the courts take issue with it. So if somebody complains and the library director, the board, the superintendent, whoever it may be, says, oh yeah, we need to get rid of that book, the court says, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. You have a policy, you have to follow the policy. Now we're seeing things that circumvent that policy. So the governors of Texas and South Carolina have both asked their state's education departments to investigate whether pornography, i.e. genderqueer, was available in school libraries. And in South Carolina, they even got the law enforcement arm of things going, and which makes librarians afraid that if it is found that pornography, and we are not talking Playboy here, we are talking books, is available in the school library, that the librarian can be criminally charged with purveying pornographic content. And again, another way that this is sort of subverting the process, the mayor of Ridgeland, Mississippi, recently withheld funding from the Madison County Library System, saying he would not release the money until all books with LGBTQ themes were removed. So on that note, Terry, you want to tell us about some other ways that book banning and censorship have popped up?
Some other horror stories? Sure.
Yes, please.
Okay. Let's see. All right. So there is an article called Censorship Beyond Books, and that is something that's happening. In 2019, Kristen Pickle from the ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom said that she'd noticed a huge increase in challenges to non-book material such as displays, social media posts, reading lists, and programs. These challenges have only increased in the recent years. A number of programs that are challenged, once again, as Maura had said, involve children. Oops, wrong way. Yeah, there we go. So Drag Queen Story Hour is a big thing, and it's been all over the country, and it's been protested against all over the country. These story times usually involve somebody who is a drag queen coming in and reading stories about differences and acceptance, not sexuality, not identity. It's just that we all are a little different. We all have our own way of going about life. And this is the way that this lovely woman goes about her life. They draw protests, and there was one up in Port Jefferson maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and they got some protests and protesters outside, but they also had a lot of people supporting it. Recently, you might have heard one in Nevada and one in California were aimed by people who were armed, who identified with the Proud Boys, and they shouted homophobic and transphobic slurs at the parents and at the children, and it was terrifying for the children, and it's terrifying for the parents. And it was there, you can read the articles, and it's just, you can imagine taking your child to a story time and having people come in military garb with guns yelling at them, and that's something that's happening now. So sometimes, as Mara said, to avoid controversies, programs are canceled by the Board of Trustees or Library Administration. And again, this is self-censorship. In 2019 in Maryland, there was a yoga program. It teaches calming techniques, teaches breathing, and it was challenged by a local pastor because he felt it indoctrinated false truths. And the school just canceled the program, and that was the end of it. Displays are often the targets of protest. This slide shows a local woman protesting the Pride display at the Riverton, Utah library. And I'll read the post because it's not that easy to read. Her post reads, double-sided display in the kids section of Riverton Library. Contact your city council members if you are not okay with your tax dollars being used for the hashtag grooming of children. So librarians now, in accordance with that article that came out a couple of days ago, are being accused of being pornographers and groomers and pedophiles. And this is, first of all, we were kind of heroes during the pandemic, and we kind of got used to people thinking we were heroes. And then now we're groomers and pedophiles. And for people who spend their life, especially people who work with children, who spend their life trying to make sure that children have access to materials, that they feel warm and they feel safe and they feel like the library is a place that they are welcome, to hear these words is incredibly painful. So recently, another way of going about this, the Lafayette Public Library in Louisiana passed a policy against political, I'm using quotes a lot, displays, so that no women's history, no Black history, no pride could be featured or displayed in the library. And this removal of displays hits close to home. And I'm not even putting up a slide on this because we've all read the newspapers when recently the Smithtown Library trustees voted to have all the pride displays removed from the children's area of the 4 library buildings. It came about after a few residents complained that these books were not appropriate for children. And the board talked about it. One of the board members was not there. They went ahead and voted on it, and they passed this resolution to remove these displays. It caused a huge uproar. I don't know if Mara was there, but I was on the meeting that followed, in which they revoked that policy. There were 1,000 people on a Zoom meeting, and more people wanted to get in because people felt so strongly about this. And Smithtown is a more conservative area, but when you get librarians involved and tell them that they are not showing books representing every single one of their patrons, you're going to get a lot of kickback. The governor got involved, and prior to the reversal, she commented, "Public places are prohibited by law from engaging in discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. We will not tolerate a don't say gay philosophy taking root in our state." There's another tricky little movement called Hide the Pride. This encourages, it's a group called Catholics Vote, and they encourage people to check out all the books on pride displays to purify, again, quotes, the library. And they either don't return the books, or they keep the books and then challenge the books. In Peekskill, New York, 30 LGBTQIA books were stolen or hidden. But on a happier note, a local group, Peekskill Pride, donated $500 to buy new books. So in order to keep controversy at bay, libraries will sometimes self-censor, as we've discussed, and decide to avoid displays that might upset people. And this is not the answer. Kristen Peekle, again, from the Office of Intellectual Freedom, says, "We see a lot of identity issues at the heart of these challenges: culture, race, sexual orientation, gender identity, issues about how people experience the world. And we see a lot of marginalized communities being kept at the margins. When programs are canceled, when displays and reading lists are eliminated, people don't see it as censorship. They see it as avoiding controversy, but it sends a powerful message to underrepresented communities that they are somehow inappropriate, that their voice doesn't count." And after sharing these discouraging stories, I'll turn it over to Mara to share some ways to combat censorship.
So have we scared you yet? Because, we're hearing about it a lot. I feel like there's a news story every day about somewhere in the country, somebody's banning, challenging, removing. But don't forget that even our horror stories included 2 temporary, at least, success stories. Smithtown was one of them. The one where the students in Pennsylvania stood up was another one. So what can you do? The first thing, stay informed. That's my first bullet. Whoops.
What happened?
That's one of my links. I don't know where that came from.
Okay.
We'll get there. So stay informed. Stay informed about what's going on in your community, in the communities around yours. Make sure you know that just make sure you know what's going on. And if you hear that book challenges are going to be discussed at your local school or library or town council or whatever it may be meeting, make sure you go to that meeting and speak out in defense of the freedom to read. Because don't forget, these people are elected officials. And having been a lobbyist, I can say one of the things I heard a lot is, well, my constituents don't care about this issue. Well, that's because nobody told them. So if you stand up and say, no, I care, then they know that, you know, if their natural inclination is to vote against a book ban, they know that they have some support in the community, and that's important for an elected official. There are organizations that do this kind of work. Terry, can you go down to my second bullet point, maybe? There we go, stay informed. There we go, Freedom to Read Foundation. So the Freedom to Read Foundation is a nonprofit legal and educational organization affiliated with the American Library Association. The Freedom to Read Foundation protects and defends the First Amendment to the Constitution and supports the rights of libraries to collect and individuals to access information. Another organization, next bullet point, is PEN America. That was founded in 1922. And it's the largest of more than 100 centers worldwide that make up the PEN International Network. PEN America works to ensure that people everywhere have the freedom to create literature, to convey information and ideas, to express their views, and to access the views, ideas, and literatures of others. Both of those organizations, the Freedom to Read Foundation and PEN America, on their website have, you know, obviously you can donate to support the work that they do, but they also have information, you know, ways to educate yourself. I think it's PEN America also has, you know, ways to fight, things you can actually do. Next bullet point, you can write a letter to a banned or challenged author. You know, if somebody is being banned or challenged and it's a book you love now or as a kid or your grandkids love or whatever it is, write to them. Just show your support that way. It goes a long way. Speaking of writing a letter, next bullet point, you can write a letter to the editor, or to an elected official supporting the freedom to read, supporting the freedom to read. The ALA on their website has a template letter that you can use. It's on their banned books resources page. So you don't have to, you know, even if you're not a great writer, just send in the ALA's template. People just need to hear your voice. And next bullet point, you can attend a Banned Books Week program at your local library. This year, Banned Books Week is September 18th to 24th. It's always about the same time in September. And I know we're just putting together our September newsletter, but we are talking about banned books programming. And if there's anything in particular that anybody would like to see us do, we are always open to that. I'm just trying to get Nola not to talk me into doing another presentation, but we will be doing some things, hopefully a couple of things even within that week. And the last thing you can do is read a banned book. There are lists, the ALA keeps lists of the top 10 banned books for the last like 10 or 15 years. They have lists of the top 100 books banned in the past, you know, 50 years, whatever they have. Pick one. Maybe it's your favorite book that you haven't read in a long time, read it again. Pick a new one that looks interesting, even if it's just to say, gosh, this is getting a lot of attention. I wonder why so many people hate it. Read it and find out. It might be your new favorite book. Or you might say, oh yeah. For example, I just want to say, I heard all this stuff about genderqueer and I read it and I thought it was a great book. But I said, I can kind of see why people have problems with it. There are parts that are very sexually explicit. But that's again where you have to remember this whole age appropriate thing. We're not suggesting it go in the elementary school library or even the middle school library. But it's an important book to have. And I'm proud to say that we will soon have a copy in our library. So those are the things you can do. This is not the first time this has happened. It is not the last time this will happen. But as the ALA reminds us in the Freedom to Read statement, democracy is our form of government. And we all have the power and the obligation, I would say, to stand up and fight for it. So I hope you've learned something today. I hope we've maybe even inspired you to take some action. But does anybody have any, oh, and this is, yes, this is the presentation that I did a few weeks ago that focuses more on the history. I think we were going to put it in the chat. But does anybody have any questions for us?
I read something today that said, I wouldn't let you tell me what kind of ice cream to eat. Why would I let you tell me what to read?
There you go. I like that.
I like that. Yeah.
I'm gonna let that take
So,
it next time.
yeah, if you have any questions, put them in
Oh, thank you, Rachel.
in the question and answer. If not, I know we've thrown a lot of information at you tonight, but as you can tell, both Mara and I feel very passionately about this. It's something that we face every day in terms of, I know she orders most of the books for her library. I order most of the books for the adults in my library. And we have to really think about whether we're meeting the needs of the people in our community and whether we have something for everyone, and that, that everybody feels welcome and everyone feels represented here. And that's incredibly important to all three of us as librarians, Rachel hiding up in the corner there. So I don't see any questions. Oh,
David, you're very welcome.
Yes. Thank you for coming. And yeah, so this is going to be recorded. So maybe Mara, we just make Nola play it next in September as one of your programs. There you go. So thank you all for hanging out with us tonight. Again, come to West Hampton, talk to Mara, come to Shelter Island, talk to me, go to Sag Harbor, talk to Rachel. We got a lot of librarians in your life here. So I want to thank you all, and thank you again, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, everyone.